to another episode of Boring History. My name is Angela and today we're delving back into the realm of myths and legends and we're going to be having a look at the Mummelsee. The Mummelsee is a 17-metre deep lake that's located in the Black Forest in Germany, and it gets its name from a white water lily that used to flourish in the area. And even without all the magical fairy stuff that we'll be discussing today, there are plenty of interesting points to make about this lake. For example, it's one of 7 remaining cirque lakes that are found in the Black Forest, which can be dated all the way back to the Ice Age, meaning they're super old. Cirque lakes, in case you're not familiar with the term, are caused when water accumulates in the depressions that are carved into the mountain by glaciers. And whilst we're on the topic of fun facts, the German word for lake is See. So whenever you see those 3 letters, well, that word at the end of the name of a place, it usually means that there is a lake associated with that location. So obviously in the case of Mummelsee, we're talking about an actual lake. However, there are also instances such as a town named Tegernsee, which is a small town found in Bavaria, which is named after a giant lake that's found there. Alright, so let's move on to the fun stuff. Anybody who's heard of the Grimm fairy tales has surely heard of the Black Forest. And so with that association in mind, it stands to reason that there are going to be some fairly fantastical tales associated with the lakes that are found in this region. The Mummelsee is said to be home to the Nix, who are a type of water spirit, or sometimes they're referred to as mermaids, who can shapeshift. According to Jacob Grimm's research, the Nix love singing and dancing, and just like sirens, they have the ability to lure unsuspecting victims to a watery grave through their enchanting voice. And I'm sure luring their victims to an early grave is greatly helped by the fact that the Nix are said to be of such an unearthly beauty that you could be forgiven for thinking that they're made up of snow white water lilies and rose enamel. These water spirit mermaid things are said to be ruled by the king of the Mummelsee, who in most versions of the myth or the legend isn't a very nice guy. Now, if you happen to have been to the Black Forest and seen the Mummelsee, you may be wondering why all you saw is just a boring, plain-looking lake. And you may be thinking, why didn't I see any of these little water spirit mermaid things just frolicking around? Well, like all good mythical creatures, the Nix and their king only like to appear at night. Legend says that once a month, under the light of the full moon, the Nix rise to the surface, transforming the lake into a magical glittering elixir. The Nix spend this night dancing and talking and playing sports. They have swimming races, they laugh, they tell jokes, and generally they just have a great time under the magical rays of the moonlight. Because let's not forget, ordinarily they're confined to the dreary depths of the lake's water. Actually, it might not be that bad, because in some versions of the myth, it's said that they're home at the bottom of the lake as an enchanting garden of spring-like beauty. But anyway, the point is that once a month, the Nix have a magical night where they're just allowed to let loose and party. However, as soon as the rooster crows and the first rays of the dawn sunlight hits the trees, the Nix must return to their underwater home. If they happen to dawdle or ignore the rooster, it's said that an ugly old grey water dwarf appears and he screeches at them to go home. And with their departure, the water of the lake returns to its usual dull and calm nature. Now, not all versions of the legends associated around the Mummelsee have the Nix as these beautiful magical creatures, because it's also been said that these creatures that live on the bottom of the lake are actually nuns. Legend has it that a monastery once stood where the lake is now. What a monastery was doing there during the Ice Age, I don't know. But I guess, as per usual, technicalities don't matter. The monastery was home to some nuns who used to help out the local farmers and help care for their children and stuff. One day there was a beautiful young nun who had fallen in love with a local farmer's boy. Now, I'm not saying that they visited the hayshed for some fun, but when the nun returned to the monastery, black water slowly started bubbling up. And it kept rising and rising and rising until eventually the entire monastery was submerged. And that's why it's said until this day the nuns still reside at the monastery at the bottom of the lake. Now finally, I feel like it'd be a waste to be looking at a legend that centers in the Black Forest without getting slightly dark. I mean, so far all we've had is sparkles and nuns. So this next legend comes from a collection of gothic short stories about the Black Forest that were written somewhere in the late 1800s. I'll actually put a link down below of some pictures of a translated version of this book because it's a very beautiful looking book. In this version of the story, the creatures of the Mummelsee are said to bathe in the water every night. Then, as the first sun rays begin to gently caress the top of the forest trees, the king of the water spirits, wearing a crown made of green rushes, slowly rises from the deep, dark depths of the water. The king, in his booming voice, orders the merriment to cease, and the sound of his call causes the water spirits to transform into beautiful white water lilies that float atop the water during the day. Now, this legend is set in the days of old, and it's said that during this period it was not uncommon for the local people who lived around the lake and in the forest to come to the water at night and have interactions with the water spirits. People would come in the evening with their knitting and just sit around and have a bit of a chat with them. And sometimes the water spirits would dive to the depth of the lake and return with pearls, which they would then gift to the local townspeople. One spring, one of the water spirits fell in love with a young, good-looking peasant boy. Let's call him Gunther, and the spirit can be called Anna. Gunther and Anna would meet every night on the green reed-covered shore of the lake. They would laugh and talk about sweet nothings and just generally enjoyed each other's company. And it got to the point where Gunther began to feel as though things were starting to get serious, and he wanted to learn more about Anna. He didn't want it to just be a spring fling. So he began to ask Anna about her past and her upbringing. Who were her parents? What was her home like? What were her hobbies? Did she have brothers and sisters? Maybe a dog? Maybe a goldfish? But Anna remained tight-lipped, and she warned Gunther to stop asking these types of questions, because if he persisted in trying to find out about her past, she would be lost to him forever. So one night, after they had bid their farewells, Gunther sneakily hung around and hid in the bushes around the lake, hoping to see where Anna returned to every morning. And for a moment, it looked as though his wish was going to be granted. He watched in awe as she plunged into the cold grey water. And he jumped up from his hiding place as if to get a better view of where precisely Anna was disappearing to. But then he froze as a piercing cry and a crack of thunder shattered through the silence of the early dawn. The previously calm lake turned ferocious, with waves tinged with the red of blood crashing at its shores and the wind howling through the trees. Horror-struck, Gunther ran to the lake, calling for Anna, but all he heard in response was a mocking laughter that seemed to rise from the bottom of the lake. And the echoes of that laughter brought the realization that his curiosity had indeed brought about the death of his lover. The king had struck her down and destroyed her, rather than let him watch her transformation. Overcome with grief, Gunther decided to become a monk, and he spent the rest of his days at the monastery at Allerheiligen. Now, there are many other stories and legends that are associated with the Mummelsee. For example, there was a 17th century author who spoke of a series of underground pathways, or underwater pathways, that led all the way to the center of the earth, a story which was perhaps inspired by Plato's Atlantis. Have you heard of any interesting stories surrounding the Mummelsee? Let me know in the comments down below, and thank you so much for joining me today. I hope you've enjoyed today's video, and I hope you'll subscribe because I look forward to sharing even more boring history with you in the future.